Have you ever stopped to think that what we now call bathing was once considered one of the pillars of an entire civilization? It seems strange, but in Rome, entering a room with hot or cold water wasn't just about hygiene, it was about politics, status, and even religion. And the curious thing is that this habit, which many philosophers call decadence, was also one of the secrets of the strength of an empire that dominated the world. While today many people view bathing as a mere routine, for the Romans, it was a daily spectacle, a space where rich and poor shared the same waters, where ideas were born amidst the steam, and where even health was prescribed in the form of immersion. The paradox is clear. A simple dip could be both a sign of discipline and of exaggerated luxury. After all, how could something so common carry so many layers of meaning? Perhaps this is the most surprising part, realizing that practices we now call modern, spas, saunas, water therapies were all already there over 2,000 years ago. But instead of being restricted to a privileged few, they were enjoyed by multitudes in structures so grand that even today their ruins are impressive. And now I ask you, where are you listening to me from? And what time is it right now? Let me know in the comments. It'll be interesting to see how, from different corners of the world and at different times, we can connect and delve together into this story that began over 2,000 years ago in Rome's public baths. Didn't emerge suddenly, as if they were an isolated invention. They arose from the Romans' close observation of what the Greeks already did in their cities. It's curious to imagine that such an intimate habit as bathing became a social institution, almost obligatory, in a civilization that valued discipline. The Roman people, pragmatic as they were, looked at other people's customs and instead of rejecting them, thought if it works for them, why not adapt it for us? The Greeks had their gymnasiums, places for physical exercise and body care, but the Romans went further. They expanded the idea, combining hygiene with collective life. They realized that water could be more than a vital resource. It could be a meeting point, a link between citizens. It wasn't just about washing the dust off your skin, but about immersing yourself in a routine that connected people from different social classes. This adaptation reveals an essential trait of the Roman character, the ability to take something already existing and transform it into something great. When one thinks of Rome, the first image that comes to mind is monumentality. It wasn't enough to simply have a place to bathe, veritable water palaces had to be created. Baths, inspired by the Greeks, soon became a hallmark of the Roman lifestyle. Imagine today if someone decided to transform a simple neighborhood gym into a cultural center with a library, food court, and even a meeting room. This was, in part, the Romans' boldness in looking to Greek practices. It's interesting to note how this Greek inspiration shows that no culture is born in isolation. Just as Rome was inspired by the Hellenistic, today we also seek foreign models without even realizing it. Just look at the influence of American coffee shops in Brazil or the success of Korean series around the world. The movement is always the same: absorb, remodel, and create something with its own identity. Rome, in this sense, was a master at appropriating and reconfiguring traditions. And if we stop and think about it, this habit of observation and adaptation is a skill anyone can apply in their daily lives. When someone sees a friend thrive because they adopted a certain routine, whether it's reading 20 minutes a day or doing light exercise before bed, they might think, what if I try that too? But in my own way. It was precisely this mindset that allowed Rome to take a Greek custom and give it a new dimension. But of course, the origin of bathing is just the beginning of a long story. From this first step, much would still develop, from the way water was conveyed to the way the experience of bathing became a spectacle of architecture and coexistence. And as you will see, every detail of this evolution holds interesting lessons for those who know how to observe carefully. Water in Rome was not just a natural resource, but a true symbol of power and dominion over nature. Without it, none of what we know as public baths would have been possible. The Roman aqueducts, often remembered as one of the greatest engineering feats of antiquity, were the backbone of this system. With each stone arch that rose, Rome proved it could bend reality to its needs. It's as if the entire city had decided that it wasn't enough to exist, it needed to flow. It's worth noting that for the average Roman, entering a bath was like experiencing the victory of engineering over scarcity. There was something magical about feeling the hot or cold water, depending on the space, without having to think about how it got there. It was like using the internet today, without being aware of the submarine cables that crisscross oceans. Comfort becomes natural, but behind it lies a gigantic effort. The aqueducts were, in this sense, the internet of Rome, invisible in everyday life, but absolutely indispensable. And see how this connects to our daily lives. How often do we enjoy modern services without reflecting on the structure that sustains them? The electricity that powers our homes, the garbage collection that disappears with the waste, the water supply that flows from our taps. Rome, by building aqueducts, inaugurated this logic. Citizens didn't need to worry about the source, just enjoy the result. This allowed urban life to expand in ways never before seen. But what's most striking is that aqueducts weren't built solely to solve practical problems. They were also monuments of propaganda. Each stone arch silently demonstrated the empire's strength. The baths, fed by this system, were a showcase of a power that was evident in every drop. Bathing in Rome wasn't just a matter of hygiene, it was, above all, a participation in a narrative of collective greatness. And if we think about it, this fascination with infrastructure still exists. Modern cities display bridges, skyscrapers, and subways as trophies of development. Rome merely paved the way for this mentality, demonstrating that water, when channeled and organized, can transform routine into spectacle. And it's curious to note that despite being essential, this was just one of the many elements that gave public baths their unique character. Entering a Roman bathhouse felt like something greater than a simple building. The Romans weren't content with the basics. They built monumental structures capable of impressing even the most skeptical. Immense columns, detailed mosaics, and imposing statues were part of the scenery. It was as if every wall said, "Here, it's not just about bathing, but about participating in something grand." The architecture spoke before any words could be spoken. The space was divided into sectors, each with its own specific function. There were hot, warm, and cold rooms, gyms for exercise, libraries for reading, and even gardens for outdoor conversations. The baths were practically cities within a city. This organization revealed how much Rome valued the experience of those who entered. It wasn't about rushing, but about taking a slow path, passing from room to room until feeling renewed. The most fascinating detail is that each room had a symbolic function. The frigidarium, for example, with its icy water, served to invigorate the body, while the caldarium, hot and steaming, evoked the intensity of life. The Romans transformed architecture into metaphor. Each step, each transition between spaces was a silent lesson in balance. It's as if the building itself were a kind of teacher, teaching about rhythms and contrast. If we look at the present, it's not much different from what happens in certain modern places. Shopping malls, cultural centers, and spas follow this logic of offering a range of experiences. The difference is that while today we often enter these spaces in a hurry, in Rome, the architecture invited us to slow down. It was a reminder that even the body needs time to adjust, and in this sense, the Romans were ahead of the curve. Another impressive feature is the use of art within the baths. The colorful mosaics on the floor, depicting gods and scenes from everyday life, were a form of teaching without words. Those who walked over these images absorbed stories, myths, and symbols. It was like a permanent exhibition, accessible to everyone, from the wealthiest to the most humble. The bathing space also became a space for visual and cultural education. And when we think of grandeur, we shouldn't forget the collective impact. For many, entering a bath was their first encounter with large-scale architectural beauty. This shaped their outlook, created aesthetic standards, and of course reinforced the sense of belonging to an empire that seemed limitless. But this grandeur was only just beginning to unfold. What came next revealed even more about how these spaces became centers of social life. Entering the public baths wasn't simply a matter of passing through a door, but rather participating in a nearly choreographed ritual. Upon arriving at the entrance, Roman citizens would hand over a small, often symbolic sum as a way of contributing to the upkeep of the space. This fee, though modest, had a value far greater than monetary. It represented the idea that everyone, rich or poor, was paying to enjoy the same communal space. It was a gesture of belonging. This initial moment already demonstrated that baths were more than just hygiene. Imagine someone arriving at a movie theater today, buying a ticket, and feeling that sense of anticipation before entering the room. The same thing happened at the hot springs. Paying the fee was like mentally signing an experience contract. It wasn't an expense, but a small price to pay for immersion in a world apart, where the city routine remained outside. Interestingly, the low fee also served a political purpose. The government ensured that even citizens with limited resources could access the baths. The space became inclusive, mixing social classes and creating unlikely encounters between senators and commoners. The minimum fee was like a password that said, "In here, everyone is part of the same community." And this sense of equality, albeit relative, was powerful. Some say this dynamic is very reminiscent of how some modern services work. Consider, for example, the symbolic value of a basic streaming subscription. It's not the price itself that matters, but the idea of access to collective content, of being included in something that millions also consume. The Romans understood this logic long before and used symbolic payment as a tool for social inclusion. Another curious detail was the atmosphere of the entrance itself. Guards, slaves, and attendants guided visitors, collected payments, and organized the flow. It was like entering a carefully planned show. For many, the simple act of crossing that portal was a highlight of the day. From then on, each step followed a script that repeated itself daily, yet still maintained its charm. And it's interesting to think that this entrance ritual, as simple as it seemed, already prepared the spirit for the experience that would come later. It was like a silent invitation to leave one's problems outside and allow oneself to immerse oneself in another atmosphere. But this was only the beginning of the journey. What happened next, within the baths, revealed even more about the Roman mentality and its relationship with the body and the community. Life inside the baths was not disorganized. The Romans mindful of social interaction, established specific rules to ensure that men and women did not share the same space at the same time. In some cities, the separation was enforced by distinct schedules. At certain times of the day, only women were allowed, at others, only men. In larger baths, there were even separate sections designed to serve each group without mixing. This division, as practical as it may seem, also revealed much of the mentality of the time. The presence of women in the baths was the subject of discussion and even controversy. Some moralists criticized it, saying that the practice could lead to excesses or inappropriate encounters. Others, however, saw the baths as an equally legitimate opportunity for well-being for all. After all, bathing was not only about hygiene, but also about socializing and leisure. And in this sense, denying women access would also deprive them of participating in one of the most important centers of Roman social life. It's interesting to think that this separation is somewhat reminiscent of some modern practices. How many gyms today still share classes or spaces offering exclusive timetables for women? The logic is similar, preserving comfort, avoiding embarrassment, and at the same time offering equal access. In other words, what seems so distant in time isn't so far removed from our everyday reality. For Roman women, bathing was more than just a matter of cleanliness, it was a form of socialization. There, they could converse, exchange experiences, and even take care of their appearance with the help of ointments and perfumes. It was, in a way, the equivalent of modern-day visits to beauty salons or spas, where, in addition to body care, there was also a space for exchanging confidences. The similarity is striking when we stop and think about it. For men, the hot springs experience was laden with status symbols. Political conversations, business negotiations, and even philosophical discussions took place there amid the steaming water. Separating the genders didn't eliminate the collective function, but it created distinct experiences shaped by the social expectations of each era. Thus, men and women shared the same space, but never in the same way. And ultimately, this separation between schedules and sections served as a silent reminder that the baths were more than just bathing spots. They reflected the entire social structure of Rome. Every detail, even the schedules, carried meaning, and this meaning became even more evident when the visitor took the next step, leaving their belongings in the changing room and immersing themselves in the full experience. The apoditerium was the first room visitors encountered after entering the baths. It functioned as a large changing room where each person left their clothes and belongings before proceeding to the next stages. It was curious to observe how this space held a symbolic meaning. By undressing, the citizen not only removed their clothing, but also, in a sense, left part of their social identity outside. Inside, among mosaic-adorned walls and niches for storing objects, everyone became equal in simplicity. This act of undressing in public, even though naturalized, still had an impact. Imagine, for example, a person accustomed to wearing clothes that demonstrated their status, arriving at the locker room and having to store them in a simple compartment. There was no toga, ring, or adornment to differentiate a senator from a common merchant at that moment. Nudity leveled, albeit temporarily, the citizens, creating an atmosphere of equality, difficult to find outside the bath. But there was also a practical side. The apoditerium was organized with niches and benches, where slaves and attendants helped store and monitor belongings. It's curious to think that even back then, there were concerns about theft. Slaves, called capseri, were responsible for guarding the objects, and of course, there were those who were suspicious because stories of petty thefts circulated among gym-goers. It's like today when someone leaves their cell phone in a gym locker and wonders if it will be there when they return. The locker room also had a subtle social function. It was the place where first glances and greetings were exchanged. Quick conversations took place among the stone benches, and even friendships could blossom in this seemingly banal space. It's like the entrance hall of a modern building, a place of passage that nevertheless has the power to mark encounters and establish connections. The apoditerium was a space of transition, and transitions always carry meaning. It's interesting to note how the act of undressing also carried psychological weight. By leaving behind their clothes, the visitor left behind the work routine, the worries of the day, and mentally prepared themselves for the experience to come. It was almost like a purification ritual before the purification. The simple act of placing the clothes in a niche already served as a key to entering another reality, calmer, more introspective. And this atmosphere of preparation made perfect sense because soon after, still within the bath routine, the anointers appeared, responsible for massaging and anointing the body with aromatic oils. What seemed like just a break in the locker room was actually the beginning of a complete experience, which would reveal itself to be even more sophisticated with each stage. Inside the baths, after leaving their clothes and belongings in the apoditerium, many Romans sought the help of the unctors. These specialized slaves were tasked with applying aromatic oils to the bathers' bodies, massaging tired muscles, and preparing the skin for the cleansing that would follow. It was delicate work, but also essential. The oils served not only to moisturize but also to soften impurities and sweat, which would later be scraped off with the stridge. The presence of the unters demonstrated how much the Romans valued body care. It wasn't just about hygiene, but a true ritual of well-being. The slow movements, the trained hands, the choice of aromas, all of this transformed the act into a sensory experience. If you think about it, it was the Roman equivalent of a modern spa session, where one goes in to relax, disconnect from the world, and feel renewed. The work of these slaves also had an important social dimension. For the wealthy, it was a status symbol to have private anointers who accompanied them even outside the baths. For the common citizen, relying on the attendants available on site created a dynamic of sharing. It was curious to see how, in the same space, different classes experienced similar services, albeit with slight differences. If we bring this to today, it's easy to see similarities. How many people seek relaxing massages, physical therapy sessions, or beauty treatments to regain energy? The logic is the same. The body needs care, and this care is often mediated by trained hands. Unctors, in this sense, were true health and beauty professionals, even if seen as servants. The scents used weren't chosen at random either. Olive oils, blended with herbs and perfumes, were applied to bring freshness and even a sense of luxury. Imagine walking into a warm room and smelling the subtle scent of rosemary or lavender permeating the air. It was a way to stimulate not only the body, but also the mind. After all, the bathing experience was complete, uniting the physical and sensory. And after this step, the process didn't end. The oils, along with the dirt, needed to be removed, and then a curious object came into play, the strigil, a curved blade used to scrape the skin. Thus, each phase of the ritual fit into the next, like pieces of a mosaic, forming a routine that went far beyond the simple idea of bathing. In Roman baths, Hygiene wasn't limited to water. The use of aromatic oils and powders was a fundamental part of body care. The Romans believed these products helped not only with cleansing, but also with protecting the skin from dryness caused by heat and sweat. In a Mediterranean climate where the sun was harsh for much of the year, this detail made all the difference. It was a practical yet sophisticated custom. The most common oils came from olives, which were abundant throughout the empire. However, it wasn't just a matter of applying the oil neat. It was often mixed with herbs, flowers, and spices. Imagine someone emerging from a hot bath with a thin layer of lavender olive oil covering their body. Besides the sensation of freshness, the aroma left a subtle mark that could linger for hours. It was a way of transforming hygiene into an almost artistic experience. Aromatic powders, made with substances such as crushed chalk or minerals, were used to absorb oil and perfume the body. They were used after scraping with a strigil, leaving the skin clean and delicately scented. In a time without deodorants or soaps, as we know them today, this combination was the most advanced. The Romans, in this sense, were centuries ahead in terms of personal care. If you think about it, it's not much different from what happens today when someone uses moisturizing lotions or perfumes after a shower. The gesture is the same, to prolong the feeling of freshness and present oneself well to others. After all, pleasant scents have always played a social role. In Rome, arriving at a meeting exuding the scent of herbs and spices was undoubtedly a silent calling card. This care also reveals the Roman search for balance between body and spirit. It wasn't just about cleansing the skin, but also about caring for one's image and self-esteem. Anyone who has been to a modern spa knows the difference it makes to leave feeling perfumed and revitalized. It's as if the body were saying, "Now I'm ready for socializing." The Romans were fully aware of this effect. And of course, the use of oils and powders wasn't the last step of the process. There was still the crucial moment of scraping with the strigil, when everything that had been applied needed to be removed, along with any impurities. A detail that may seem simple, but it concealed a profound symbolism, the idea of complete purification. The use of the strigil also had an almost meditative aspect. The scraping motion, repeated slowly over the arms, legs, and back, created a feeling of lightness, as if each impurity removed was also a mental weight left behind. It was a physical gesture, but one that symbolized inner renewal. Many even associated the act with the idea of purification, as if the scraping away of dirt were a metaphor for everyday worries. This detail shows how the Romans knew how to transform common habits into deeper experiences. Today, we see something similar in modern practices, like exfoliation or skin cleansing in spas. It's not just about removing dead cells, but about feeling revitalized, ready for a new beginning. The strigil, in this sense, was a distant predecessor of techniques we continue to adapt today. Furthermore, the instrument could be used by specialized slaves who helped reach difficult areas of the body, such as the back. There was a dimension of collective care in this gesture. A citizen could entrust their body to the hands of another in a relationship of trust and dependence. It's curious to think that something as intimate as cleaning became a shared act, strengthening bonds between people of different social statuses. Aesthetics shouldn't be overlooked either. A clean-shaven body perfumed with aromatic powders was a sign of refinement. The Romans, who placed such high value on appearance, saw the strigil not only as a hygiene tool, but also as a status symbol. Those who took care of their skin showed the world that they cared for their appearance, and this was a silent way of earning respect. And of course, the ritual didn't stop with the scraping. After using the strigil, the body was ready to immerse itself in the different environments of the baths, each with its own specific function, from cold baths to intense heat. The scraping, therefore, was just one link in a chain of complementary steps that, as we will see, had their own meanings. The frigidarium was one of the most impressive spaces in the Roman baths, precisely because it offered a cold bath immediately after the sequence of oils, scrapings, and heat. For many, plunging into icy waters was an initial shock, but also an immediate invitation to awaken the senses. The skin, freshly cleansed with strigil, reacted to the cold as if awakened from a deep sleep. The whole body tensed, but then a feeling of renewed energy came. This contrast was part of Roman wisdom. Alternating heat and cold wasn't an architectural quirk, but a way to strengthen health. Today, doctors talk about the benefits of cold baths for blood circulation and even immunity. The Romans, without knowing scientific terms, already realized empirically that this practice invigorated. It was as if the cold water told the body, now you're ready to continue. The frigidarium's ambiance was carefully crafted to create this atmosphere. Large marble pools illuminated by natural light welcomed bathers. The sensation of clarity and freshness was accentuated by the sounds of moving water. Imagine entering a room where the echo of diving mingles with low voices, creating a calm yet vibrant atmosphere. It was a complete sensory experience. If we think in terms of comparison, the frigidarium can be associated with modern-day cryotherapy chambers or even the practice of ice baths advocated by athletes. The principle is the same, using cold as a tool for physical and mental recovery. It's curious to note how a technique thousands of years old remains relevant, simply adapted to modern contexts. This shows that certain human discoveries never cease to make sense. Beyond the physical benefit, there was also a social aspect. Diving into cold waters, side by side with other citizens, created a silent complicity. Everyone shared that initial shock and then laughed or commented on the sensation. It was a moment that united people of different backgrounds in a single bodily experience. The water once again proved to be a bridge between distinct social worlds. And of course, the frigidarium was just one stage of the journey. After the cold bath, there was a passage to warm and hot rooms, each with its own function. The cold served as preparation, a final cleansing before entering the room where heat became the true protagonist of the experience. The tepidarium was perhaps the most subtle space in the baths, and at the same time one of the most important. There, the temperature was warm and balanced, functioning as a transition between the shock of cold and the intensity of heat. It was the environment where the body could acclimate, adjust its breathing, and prepare for the next stage. In modern terms, we could say it was a space of adaptation, almost an invitation to conscious rest before facing new stimuli. Tepidarium's atmosphere was calm, almost meditative. The warm air gently enveloped the visitor, like a light blanket on a cool night. The Romans, attentive to every detail, knew that this pause was necessary for the bath to be not only physical, but also mental. It was a time to simply be, to talk quietly, or even reflect on the day's events. Amidst the hectic pace of Rome, this space represented a rare opportunity to slow down. Architecturally, the tepidarium was strikingly elegant. The walls were decorated with colorful mosaics, and the stone benches, discreetly heated by the hypocaust system, transmitted gentle warmth to the body. The experience was not only about temperature, but also about aesthetics. Every detail conveyed that this was no ordinary place, but rather an environment designed to nourish body and spirit. Interestingly, the tepidarium also served a social function. It was common to see groups gathered there, exchanging ideas and laughing, in no rush to move on. In some accounts, this space was compared to a kind of Roman living room, and if we think about it, the comparison is apt. It was there that bonds were forged, confidences were shared, and a sense of comfort was shared. Today, this logic still survives in light saunas or warm baths that serve as transitions. Many health experts suggest alternating temperatures to stimulate circulation, but always with breaks. The tepidarium already anticipated this wisdom, giving the body time to balance itself. It was the science of well-being applied centuries before we had medical studies to prove it. And of course, upon leaving the warm environment, the visitor was ready to face the most intense room of all, the caldarium, where heat and steam played a central role in the Roman bathing experience. The caldarium was the beating heart of the Roman bath. Here, heat dominated the space, creating a dense atmosphere of steam that enveloped everyone who entered. The heated walls, hot floor, and boiling water transformed the space into a veritable laboratory of physical endurance. For the Romans, the caldarium was more than a room, it was a test of stamina, a place where body and mind were tested by the intensity of the heat. The experience wasn't just about sweating. Sweat, induced by the heat, was seen as a way to expel impurities and renew energy. It was a deep cleansing, almost a catharsis. Many believed that staying in the caldarium strengthened the body against illness and prepared the mind to face the day's challenges. It's curious to note how this idea resonates to this day in practices like the sauna, used for detoxification and relaxation. Caldarian's architecture was carefully designed to intensify the effect. The hypocaust system heated the floor and walls, maintaining a uniformly high temperature. Hot pools were available for quick dips or long immersion. Imagine the contrast. The body enveloped in steam, while the heat slowly penetrates, relaxing muscles and opening pores. It was an irresistible invitation to release tension. But the caldarium also had a social dimension. Men of different backgrounds shared the same space, sitting side by side on stone benches, often conversing or simply remaining silent. The heat leveled everyone, creating a kind of temporary brotherhood. Inside, there were no titles or positions, just sweaty bodies enduring the same intensity. It was, in a way, a metaphor for community life. This space also served as a stage for reflection. Many Romans reported that the deep heat of the caldarium clarified their thoughts, as if the steam cleansed not only the body but also the mind. It was a place of introspection, where ideas could emerge amid the muffled silence and the sound of boiling water. It's like when someone leaves a sauna today, claiming they had their best ideas there. And of course, after this plunge into extreme heat, the body needed relief. That's why, after the caldarium came the transition to milder waters, reminding us that balancing extremes was key to the Roman ritual. The journey through the bath held many other meanings, and each room revealed a new layer of this collective experience. The hypocaustum was one of the greatest technological innovations that made Roman baths possible. It was an ingenious heating system in which the floor was raised on small brick columns, creating an empty space through which hot air circulated. This heat came from furnaces fueled by wood and coal and spread evenly across the floor and walls. The result was astonishing. Efficiently heated spaces, something few civilizations had achieved until then. This mechanism not only ensured bathers' comfort but also demonstrated Roman engineering prowess. It wasn't just about building aqueducts and amphitheaters, but also about controlling basic elements such as fire and water in an organized manner. The hypocostum transformed bathing into a unique experience, as the constant temperature allowed for alternating between cold, warm, and hot rooms without system failure. The genius of this system becomes even more evident when compared to modern heating techniques. Today, we have central heating and underfloor heating in luxury homes, but the logic is exactly the same: to distribute heat in a controlled and comfortable manner. The Romans, with their resources, had already discovered this solution 2,000 years earlier. This shows how technology, no matter how much it evolves, maintains ancient roots. Another interesting point was the scale at which hypocostum was applied. In the great imperial baths, the system heated not just one room, but dozens of spaces simultaneously. This required coordination and continuous labor from slaves responsible for keeping the furnaces lit. In other words, behind the comfort, there was also invisible human effort, reminding us that even the most impressive advances carry a social cost. And there was also a symbolic element. Feeling the warmth coming from the ground conveyed a sense of welcome, as if the earth itself were alive, warming those who walked upon it. This detail gave the bath an almost ritualistic feel. It wasn't just technology, it was also a sensory experience where each step reaffirmed the human power to shape nature. But of course, the hypocostum was only part of the process. It allowed the rooms to function in an orderly fashion, creating the perfect setting for what the Romans valued most: transforming bathing into a daily, almost indispensable habit, reflecting discipline and belonging. In Rome, bathing was not a luxury reserved for a select few, but rather a habit incorporated into the routine of a large portion of the population. Many citizens frequented the baths daily, much like those who today go to the gym or take a morning walk. This custom reflected not only a concern for hygiene, but also a cultural discipline. Caring for one's body was seen as part of civic duty, something that strengthened individual health and consequently the collective strength of the city. This daily practice also demonstrated the accessibility of the baths. Since entry was inexpensive, it was possible for both rich and poor to maintain the habit. For some, bathing was an essential respite from tiring workdays. For others, it was an opportunity to show off in a social setting. Either way, bathing became a highlight of the day, a long awaited moment that brought both relaxation and interaction. It's interesting to note that even though it was a daily occurrence, bathing never lost its charm. Each visit to the hot springs was a repetition, but always with small variations: new encounters, unexpected conversations, different experiences in the rooms. It's like having coffee every day at a bakery and still finding new things in the faces, stories, and smells of the place. The ritual became routine, but never banal. Today, we can draw clear parallels with modern practices. Going to the Roman bath was like attending a club or sports center, where, in addition to body care, there was also leisure, friendships, and even business opportunities. This shows that deep down, the need to create daily rituals that combine well being and sociability remains a universal human characteristic. Beyond cleanliness, the daily bath also had a psychological dimension. It was a time to disconnect from worries, to leave the dust of the streets and the stresses of public life behind. For many, stepping into the hot water and then the cold bath was like being reborn each day, and this feeling of renewal was something the Romans deeply valued. But daily bathing wasn't limited to physical and mental care. It also opened up space for something greater: community life, where encounters between citizens became a platform for coexistence, the exchange of ideas, and even political decisions. Inside the baths, bathing was only part of the experience. The true value lay in the conviviality, in the encounters between people who, outside, would be unlikely to come together. Senators, merchants, artisans, and even commoners found themselves side by side in the waters and corridors. This intermingling created a unique atmosphere where differences in status were softened by coexistence. It was as if the water acted as a leveling element, capable of bridging distinct worlds. The social space of the baths closely resembled a large covered plaza. Conversations arose naturally, whether during a soak in the frigidarium or while waiting in the tepidarium. Friends arranged meetings, acquaintances exchanged news, and even political rivals took advantage of the neutrality of the environment to debate. All of this reinforced the baths' function as centers of social integration, far beyond hygiene. It's worth remembering that, for many Romans, bathing was an opportunity to feel part of something greater. Imagine a simple worker who, after a day of hard work, could share the same space as powerful men. This proximity fostered a sense of citizenship and belonging, an experience few other institutions offered. The baths, in this sense, were democratic, albeit within the confines of an unequal society. Today, we see something similar in public spaces like parks, clubs, or food courts, in shopping malls. These are places where people go not only to consume, but also to meet familiar faces, chat, and feel like they belong to a collective. Rome had already understood this power of connection, transforming the baths into great centers of sociability. And there was also an emotional dimension. For many, bathing was a time to relax with friends, to laugh, to share confidences. The warmth of the water and the inviting environment facilitated conversations that might not have occurred in other contexts. It was as if the relaxed body also opened space for the mind to free itself. And in ancient societies, these moments were precious. But the baths went beyond casual encounters. They became the stage for serious discussions, some of which were decisive for the political and cultural life of Rome. What seemed like mere leisure actually hid a powerful mechanism for exchange and influence. The hot springs were much more than just places of leisure. They were veritable stages for political and philosophical discussions. Influential men, accustomed to deciding the direction of the city, took advantage of the relaxed atmosphere to debate ideas, form alliances, and even negotiate agreements. The warmth of the water and the relaxed atmosphere seemed to dissolve formal barriers, allowing for more frank and direct dialogue. It was there, amidst the steam, that many important decisions began to take shape. It's fascinating to imagine how philosophy found its place in Roman daily life. While bodies rested in the pools or on stone benches, sharp minds discussed morality, virtue, destiny, and power. Some accounts suggest that the Stoics and Epicureans themselves found the baths a conducive environment for expanding ideas. It was as if the relaxed body opened space for deeper reflection, transforming the physical experience into an intellectual one. These political meetings weren't limited to senators and magistrates. Merchants and ordinary citizens also had the opportunity to listen and participate in the conversations, albeit on a smaller scale. This made the baths a kind of parallel forum where knowledge circulated less rigidly. Thus, the water served not only as a means of purifying the body, but also as a conduit for ideas. Today, we find equivalents in cafes, restaurants, and even gyms, where people enjoy informal moments to discuss business or share thoughts. How many startups were born at coffee tables? How many political projects began in relaxed gatherings? The Romans merely inaugurated a practice that spans centuries, combining social interaction with the development of ideas. Beyond the content of the conversations, what was striking was the atmosphere that encouraged listening. Without the formality of temples or the Senate, the debates flowed more naturally. It was possible to question, laugh, disagree, and even change one's mind without the pressure of official protocol. This lightheartedness, paradoxically, meant that many reflections gained traction and were later taken seriously. And while bathing offered this space for dialogue, it also served as a setting for other forms of leisure. After all, not everyone went to the hot springs seeking philosophical debates. Many simply sought distractions, games, and moments of lightness, which arose amidst the same routine. In the baths, between one room and another, there were always spaces reserved for games and distractions. The Romans loved to spend time in recreational activities, and board games like Ludus Latruncultorum were extremely popular. Sitting on stone benches or makeshift tables, citizens of all ages gathered to play games that combined strategy and luck. It was curious to observe how, amid the steam and the sound of the water, an atmosphere of pure fun was also created. These games weren't just seen as a pastime. Many believed they helped exercise the mind, sharpen reasoning, and even prepare for political and military negotiations. After all, playing required patience, calculation, and a good dose of intuition. It's like today when people get together to play chess, checkers, or even cards. Behind the fun, there's always a mental workout. In addition to the board games, there were also light physical activities held in spaces adjacent to the baths, such as short runs, ball games, or stretching exercises. These leisure activities served to relax the body before or after bathing. For the Romans, physical care and recreation were not separate but complementary. The bath was the centerpiece, but everything around it contributed to a complete experience. It's interesting to compare this with modern life. Today, many gyms and clubs offer play areas, cafes, and social spaces precisely to extend people's stays. In Rome, this logic already existed. The bath was the meeting point, but leisure extended the stay, encouraging citizens to spend hours within the complex. It was as if the baths were a mix of spa, public square, and cultural center. Games also had a powerful social function. Imagine a senator playing against a young apprentice, or a merchant challenging a veteran soldier. These interactions broke down barriers, created bonds, and allowed everyone to share, even if only briefly, a sense of equality. The board was neutral territory, where differences in status faded. And of course, leisure wasn't limited to games. Often, while some played matches, others participated in readings or attended artistic performances, which also found their place in the baths. Thus, bathing became part of a larger universe, where the body, mind, and spirit were stimulated in diverse ways. Baths weren't just places to pamper the body or play games. They often doubled as makeshift classrooms, where orators and intellectuals held public lectures and readings. Imagine relaxing on a stone bench, enveloped by the gentle warmth of the tepidarium, and suddenly hearing a poet reciting verses from Virgil or a philosopher explaining Stoic concepts. This was the kind of experience Romans could have in their daily lives. These moments played an important role in the cultural development of citizens. Public reading was a way to democratize access to knowledge, allowing even those who couldn't read to hear stories, poems, and ideas. In a society where not everyone had access to books, this practice represented a bridge between the wisdom of scholars and the attentive ears of the people. It was a kind of living library, shared in real time. Many young people took advantage of these opportunities to learn, almost as informal apprentices. It was common for future politicians or lawyers to attend lectures at the baths, observing the rhetoric of the more experienced. It was a veritable open school, where each speech became an example of persuasion and oratory technique. It's no exaggeration to say that within the humid walls of the baths, future leaders of Rome emerged. If we compare this to today, we can see parallels with lectures in cultural centers, book clubs, or even modern podcasts. Just as many people today take advantage of leisure time to educate themselves, the Romans also combined entertainment and learning. The difference is that, instead of headphones, they had their voices echoing through the marble halls. These cultural activities also reinforced the communal character of the baths. People came not only for hygiene, but also for ideas, inspiration, and cultural contact. It was as if the bath cleansed the body, while the readings and lectures purified the mind. The Romans knew intuitively that body and spirit needed to work together, and while some delighted in poetry or philosophy, others took the opportunity to negotiate with merchants who also circulated through the baths. After all, the space was so vast and diverse that there was room for both learning and business. Roman baths were not only spaces for hygiene and leisure, but also veritable hubs of commerce. It was common to find street vendors selling everything from fresh fruit to small personal items. Some sold sandals, towels, aromatic oils, and even sweet treats to be enjoyed between baths. The always bustling environment became an informal market, where business naturally blended with the relaxing routine. This presence of vendors wasn't seen as intrusive, but as part of the experience. Many bathers, upon exiting the hot or cold waters, took the opportunity to purchase something to complete the ritual. It was like leaving a movie theater and passing through the candy store, or going to a modern gym that offers supplements and accessories at the reception. The bath was the center, but the commerce revolved around it, expanding the scope of the experience. Interestingly, this trade strengthened community life. Merchants knew their regular customers, understood their preferences, and built bonds of trust. This transformed each visit to the hot springs into an opportunity not only to relax, but also to meet a familiar vendor, negotiate prices, and even exchange news. In this context, commerce was also a form of social interaction. The most sought after products were undoubtedly those related to the body: oils, perfumes, and small cosmetics. Some were simple and inexpensive, accessible to all, while others, more sophisticated, demonstrated status and power. Buying a rare oil imported from the East was a sign of refinement, a detail that could even attract admiring glances inside the baths. Thus, even consumption carried a social significance. If we think about today, the logic hasn't changed much. Today, large leisure and wellness centers also offer exclusive products, often at high prices, precisely to reinforce the idea of belonging to a lifestyle. Rome already understood this mechanism. Commerce was part of the experience, not an external element. And while the merchants circulated offering their products, in other areas of the thermal baths, there were those seeking another type of activity, physical exercise, which preceded a dip in the waters and completed the cycle of body care. In Roman baths, before immersing themselves in the waters, citizens would often gather in the palustra, areas designated for physical exercise. There, the body was prepared for bathing through activities such as running, discus throwing, wrestling, and even rudimentary weightlifting. For the Romans, moving the body before entering the waters wasn't just fun, it was part of a complete care cycle, combining effort, sweat, and finally, purification. This practice had roots in the Greek tradition, where gymnastics was seen as an essential part of education. The Romans, always attentive to adapting useful customs, incorporated the logic of physical exercise into their baths. It was as if the bath were the ultimate reward. After the discipline of training, the body, already warmed by activity, found the necessary relief in the warm or hot waters. Exertion and rest were completed in the same space. Beyond the physical benefits, there was a clear social dimension. Exercising in public was a way to display strength, endurance, and even technical skill. Young people competed against each other, veterans demonstrated their prowess, and spectators watched the contests as if they were small spectacles. It was a scenario that blended competition, admiration, and learning. In many ways, it resembled modern gyms, where exercise is also in part. Interestingly, the exercises focused not only on the body, but also on character. There was a belief that training physical endurance prepared one for the challenges of public and military life. A citizen who exercised demonstrated discipline and commitment to their own health, qualities seen as civic virtues. Thus, the palastra functioned not only as a training space, but also as a school of value. If we compare it to modern life, it's easy to draw parallels. Today, many see exercise as a way to release accumulated tension, to improve the mind while taking care of the body. The Romans already understood this connection 2 millennia ago. It's no wonder modern athletes resort to hot or cold baths after intense workouts. The Roman logic remains alive, adapted to new realities. And after sweating it out in the palestras, nothing made more sense than immersing yourself in the thermal baths. But it wasn't just the body seeking recovery, there was also room for something more symbolic, where status and prestige were displayed almost silently. At the baths, it wasn't enough to simply pamper one's body. For many Romans, it was the perfect setting to display prestige and wealth. The clothes left in the changing room might be simple, but the expensive accessories and perfumes revealed who held power. The manner in which someone arrived accompanied by slaves or servants also spoke volumes about their social standing. It was a silent parade of status, in which even the bath became a showcase. The wealthiest often used imported oils from Egypt or the East and spared no expense on rare aromatic powders. These details, imperceptible to the casual eye, were carefully observed by others. The exotic scent, the oil's texture, even the packaging used. Everything served to make a difference. It was like someone using a luxury perfume in a public setting today. No need to say anything. The aroma speaks for itself. Status displays also played out in conversations. Many took advantage of the relaxed atmosphere of the waters to mention their possessions, military victories, or political connections. This wasn't empty ostentation, but a way to reinforce social identity. The message was clear: I belong to the elite, and I'm here for everyone to see. Bathing in this sense was a stage for recognition. Interestingly, this behavior isn't so far removed from modern life. Think of exclusive clubs, sophisticated gyms, or high end spas. More than just services, these places offer the opportunity to show belonging to a different social class. Rome, 2,000 years ago, already understood this dynamic, transforming baths into social showcases. But this display wasn't always explicit. Often it was evident in the subtle details: the softest tail, the most efficient slave, the calm manner of carrying themselves. Small gestures were enough to create distinction. It was a silent game where everyone observed and was observed, and every movement had meaning. And of course, if the baths served as a stage for the display of individual power, they were also used by the state itself to reinforce collective greatness. The imperial baths, built with public funds, represented not only personal luxury but also political propaganda on a monumental scale. The great imperial baths were much more than simple bathing places. Built on a monumental scale, they functioned as instruments of political propaganda, projecting the emperor's image of generosity and power. By erecting these gigantic complexes, rulers conveyed a clear message: here is the fruit of our victory, and it belongs to you, citizens of Rome. Bathing, in this context, was also a demonstration of state control and benevolence. Perhaps the most famous example is the Baths of Caracalla, an architectural colossus that welcomed thousands of people daily. With gardens, libraries, leisure spaces, and immense pools, the complex demonstrated that Rome not only dominated peoples, but also knew how to care for them. This grandeur reinforced the idea that Roman life was incomparable, and that no other empire offered so much to its citizens. It was politics translated into marble and steam. Beyond the visual impact, there was the emotional effect. Entering an imperial bath was like feeling part of something much greater. The common citizen, who had never set foot in a palace, could experience the sense of grandeur within those walls. It was as if imperial power was poured over the people in the form of architecture. With each erected column, with each brilliant mosaic, the glory of Rome and its rulers was reinforced. Interestingly, this strategy is still used today. Governments and leaders invest in monumental works, stadiums, bridges, cultural centers, not only to meet practical needs, but also to leave a mark of power. It's as if to say, while we ruled, this was built. Rome, as so often, had already understood this logic and applied it masterfully. But there was also a strategic detail. Building grand baths served to calm social tensions. In periods of instability, offering free or affordable leisure helped keep the people satisfied. It was a form of preventative politics, of buying loyalty with comfort. It's no wonder the saying bread and circuses resonates to this day. Rome knew how to balance power and concessions, and within this interplay of grandeur and politics, bathing also carried spiritual dimensions. It wasn't just about the body or propaganda. There were times when bathing rituals intertwined with the sacred, creating a curious bridge between hygiene and religion. Although baths were seen primarily as spaces for leisure and hygiene, their connection to the sacred cannot be ignored. For many Romans, the act of bathing went beyond physical cleansing. It was also a form of spiritual purification. Offering rituals were often performed before or after bathing, on small altars erected within or near the baths. Thus, body and soul seemed to align in a single act. Some gods were especially associated with water and bathing. Apollo, linked to health, and Asclepius, the god of medicine, were frequently dedicated blood. Fountains and springs used to supply the baths, were often considered sacred places, with offerings thrown into their waters. It was common to find coins or small votive objects at the bottom of pools, symbols of devotion and requests for protection. This relationship demonstrates how the Romans viewed life as an integrated whole. There was no rigid separation between the physical and the spiritual. Caring for the body meant simultaneously caring for the mind and respecting the divine. It was as if the water, upon touching the skin, also washed away invisible worries and guilt. Bathing thus became a ritualistic act, albeit one that was part of daily life. If we look at the present, we'll see that this practice isn't so distant. How many people today associate bathing with moments of reflection, almost like a private meditation? Some people light candles, use aromatic salts, or say prayers before getting into the water. The logic remains the same. Water is seen as purifying, a means of renewing energy. The Romans only formalized this view in collective ritual. The curious thing is that even in an environment filled with voices, games, and negotiations, there was room for this silent and reverent side. This revealed the complexity of the baths. They were places of noise and silence, of politics and devotion, of body and spirit. This blend is what made them so fascinating. And at the same time that religion was present, another perspective also emerged: the belief that baths helped maintain health, functioning as a kind of preventative medicine, something that gained more and more space in the Roman imagination. The Romans firmly believed that baths had a therapeutic function. More than just removing dirt, alternating between cold and hot water was seen as a way to strengthen the body against disease. This practice helped stimulate blood circulation, relax muscles, and cleanse pores. It was as if the body, subjected to different temperatures, became more resilient. Even without modern science, the Romans saw the health benefits in practice. Many physicians of the time recommended frequent visits to the baths as part of a balanced lifestyle. Galen, the famous Roman physician, wrote about the importance of water in maintaining body harmony. He believed that heat and steam helped eliminate harmful humors, while cold reinvigorated vital forces. Thus, bathing was not just leisure, it was a medical prescription, almost as serious as a controlled diet. Interestingly, the common people also embraced this view. Daily bathing was believed to prevent fevers and aches, as well as ward off invisible ailments. For many, bathing was an affordable form of health insurance, especially in an era without antibiotics or advanced treatments. In this sense, the baths functioned as a collective preventive hospital open to any citizen willing to pay the symbolic fee. If we compare it to today, we see that the logic remains. Today, doctors recommend practices such as hydrotherapy, cryotherapy, or even contrast baths for muscle recovery. The Romans intuitively already applied these principles centuries ago. The difference is that they made it a daily, accessible, and collective ritual rather than an isolated procedure. The psychological aspect cannot be ignored either. By relaxing in the heat of the caldarium or feeling the cool of the frigidarium, many believed that the mind purified itself along with the body. This feeling of emotional lightness was seen as an essential part of health. After all, a balanced spirit also strengthened physical strength. But, as with everything, there were those who criticized excesses. Some moralists argued that excessive bathing weakened the body and corrupted morals. This debate between benefit and excess would haunt the spas throughout their history, demonstrating that even health could become a topic of controversy. Not everyone saw the baths solely as spaces for health and socializing. For some Roman moralists, these environments were synonymous with excess. Some criticized the excessive luxury, the improvised banquets, the frivolous conversations, and even the amount of time people spent there. Many argued that the baths, instead of strengthening the body and spirit, were turning citizens into lazy, pleasure seeking individuals. Authors like Seneca, for example, made veiled criticisms of the way the Romans indulged in comfort. He saw the baths as a risk of moral decadence, where excessive heat and rare perfumes distanced people from virtue. For him, discipline and simplicity should prevail over the pursuit of bodily pleasures. Thus, the baths, which for many were centers of balance, became for others symbols of corruption. These criticisms weren't limited to philosophy, there were also political concerns. Some senators argued that the baths, by bringing crowds together in a relaxed setting, could weaken the seriousness of public life. In other words, while Rome needed military and political discipline, the people spent hours in hot water, discussing trivialities. It was almost like accusing the baths of being society's collective vice. Interestingly, this kind of debate remains relevant today. How often do we hear similar criticisms about luxury gyms, exclusive spas, or even time spent on social media? The line between healthy leisure and excess is always blurred. In Rome, a daily bath could be seen as legitimate self care or unnecessary indulgence, depending on your perspective. At the same time, the very excesses were part of the spa's charm. For many, it was the only time they could enjoy something grand, even if on a small scale. Eating exotic fruits, smelling imported oils, or simply spending more time relaxing was for the average citizen a breath of luxury amidst the harshness of life. But this blend of virtue and criticism didn't stop there. There were also those who raised another delicate issue, the coexistence of different social classes in the same space, something that could be both a symbol of inclusion and a source of tension. Among the many praises of the baths, there were also dissenting voices that saw them as a clear sign of Roman decadence. Some moralists claimed that the discipline that had founded the empire was being lost amidst lukewarm waters and imported perfumes. For them, citizens who had once been forged on the battlefield were transforming into fragile men accustomed to comfort and prolonged idleness. Bathing in this critical view was more poison than cure. Stoic philosophers like Seneca warned against indulgence. He argued that true strength came not from pleasure, but from resisting temptation, spending hours in warm environments, listening to music, and savoring delicacies seemed to these thinkers the opposite of virtue. The Roman citizen was supposed to be austere, strong, and disciplined, not someone who indulged in the luxury of the baths. The contrast between these values revealed a profound cultural tension. There were also those who associated the baths with more serious vices, rumors of secret encounters, extravagances, and immoral behavior circulated among critics. Whether they were exaggerations or truths didn't matter. The mere existence of rumors fueled distrust. The reputation of the baths, as health and social centers, could also be tinged with distrust and suspicion. If we think about it, this kind of criticism hasn't disappeared. Even today, leisure spaces face similar accusations. Clubs are seen as places of ostentation. Parties are interpreted as symbols of moral decadence. Even the simple act of dedicating too much time to leisure is often frowned upon. In Rome, baths carried precisely this double burden. They were both a blessing and a curse. Interestingly, this critical view came more from the philosophical and moralistic elite than from the common people. For most citizens, the baths were a necessity, a relief for tired bodies, and an opportunity for social integration. However, the elite, which preached discipline, saw this as a danger of collective weakening. The divergence between the popular view and the moralistic view was striking, and precisely because they brought together so many different types of people in the same space. The baths became the ideal stage for revealing social contrasts. There, among marble columns and hot pools, distinct classes mingled in a way rare in Rome, which raised new discussions about the balance between equality and hierarchy. One of the most fascinating aspects of the baths was precisely the coexistence of different social classes in the same space. Within those marble walls, senators could share the pool with soldiers, merchants, and even commoners. The water, in a way, dissolved hierarchies and created an environment of relative equality. Although outside the baths the differences were glaring, in the baths there were moments when everyone was simply naked, sharing the same ritual. For many scholars, this characteristic was revolutionary. Few environments in Rome allowed such close proximity between rich and poor. Of course, each person's experience varied. The wealthiest could bring their own slaves and sophisticated oils, while the poorest depended on the basic services provided. But even so, physical proximity created a sense of collective belonging that was rarely replicated in other spaces in the city. It's curious to imagine the conversations that emerged from this mixture. A merchant could exchange ideas with a politician, a soldier could listen to philosophical reflections, and even unlikely alliances could emerge from these interactions. It was as if the baths functioned as a vast social network of the time, connecting people from different worlds around a common experience. Today we see something similar in spaces like public transportation, squares, or stadiums. These are places where social differences are temporarily softened, and everyone shares the same experience. Of course, inequalities don't disappear, but the simple fact of being side by side creates a different perception. Rome, with its baths, offered this rare encounter between worlds. However, this mixing also generated tensions. Some considered it inappropriate for such distinct classes to meet in an intimate space like the bath. Some moralists feared that this proximity would erode the social order, blurring the roles that sustained the structure of Rome. For others, however, this mixing was proof of the empire's strength, a place where everyone, regardless of position, could benefit from the same institution. And precisely because they were such symbolic collective spaces, the baths also reflected the empire's moments of crisis. As the political and economic structure began to falter, the decline of the baths became a mirror of Rome's broader decline. As the Roman Empire began to face political, economic, and military crises, the baths, once bustling with life, began to lose their luster. Maintaining such grandiose structures required constant resources, functioning aqueducts, stoked furnaces, and slaves working tirelessly. As the empire's finances collapsed, sustaining this collective luxury became increasingly difficult. What was once a symbol of prosperity became a burden on the public coffer. Beyond the economic issue, there was also the insecurity brought on by the barbarian invasions. Many aqueducts were destroyed or abandoned, cutting off the water supply that fed the bath. Without the continuous flow, pools and rooms were left empty, and little by little, the great complexes became silent ruins. Water, which once represented life and power, came to symbolize the fragility of a weakened Rome. This decline also reflected a shift in mentality. In times of crisis, bathing ceased to be a priority. Roman citizens, who previously viewed the baths as a space for socializing and health, now worried more about survival, protecting their families, and the scarcity of resources. The luxury of the coldarium or frigidarium seemed too distant in the face of famine and war. It's interesting to note how this transformation reveals the vulnerability of even the largest institutions. What seemed eternal and unshakable eventually gave way to circumstance. Today, when we see the ruins of still imposing baths, it's hard to imagine that they were once abandoned and forgotten by entire generations. But this is the lesson history repeats. Nothing, no matter how large, is immune to the ravages of time. The abandonment of the baths also had a profound cultural impact. The space that once served as a place to gather people, exchange ideas, and share experiences lost its centrality. Roman society, already divided and fragile, also lost this unifying link. It's as if the decline of the waters had been a harbinger of the greater decline to come. But even in the face of this collapse, the baths did not disappear completely. Many were repurposed for other purposes, while others continued to inspire practices that would span the centuries, especially after the rise of Christianity and the shift in Rome's cultural values. With the rise of Christianity, the role of baths began to change significantly. Many Christian leaders viewed these spaces with suspicion, associating them with luxury, public nudity, and even practices considered immoral. Gradually, baths lost their aura as an essential part of daily life and began to be seen as symbols of a pagan lifestyle. This cultural shift was instrumental in the transformation or abandonment of many complexes. However, not all the baths were destroyed immediately. Some were adapted and given new functions. Large halls formerly used for bathing began to serve as community meeting spaces, shelters, and even places for religious practices. This reuse demonstrates Rome's ability to repurpose its own monumentality, albeit in a completely different context. It's interesting to note how the Christian view of the body influenced this change. If for the ancient Romans, shared nudity was natural, for Christians, it represented something to be contained. The idea of spiritual purification began to override collective physical care. Thus, water, once a symbol of sociability, came to be understood primarily in sacramental terms, as in baptism. This process also reflects the shift in values. What was once a space for displaying status, socializing, and leisure became a reminder of an era of excess that needed to be left behind. It's as if every wall of the baths carried memories of a time the new faith wished to overcome, yet the grandeur of the architecture prevented complete oblivion. Many of these structures remain standing, silently bearing witness to the cultural transition. Today, when visiting the ruins of Roman baths, it's hard not to think of this clash of visions. On one side, the glory of pagan Rome, which celebrated the body and conviviality. On the other, the seriousness of Christian Rome, which prioritized the soul in seclusion. This overlapping of worlds partly explains why so many of these buildings have survived, even though they have been stripped of their original function. And despite initial resistance, the idea of collective bathing did not disappear. On the contrary, in regions influenced by Rome, traditions such as Turkish baths and later modern spas would draw directly from this heritage, adapting it to new contexts and values. The end of the Roman Empire did not mean the disappearance of the custom of collective bathing. On the contrary, Many traditions survived and evolved over the centuries. Turkish baths, known as hammams, are direct heirs to Roman philosophy, spaces for socializing, purification, and body care. Although they have incorporated Islamic and Eastern elements, they still preserve the idea of rooms with different temperatures and rituals that combine hygiene and spirituality. In the Middle Ages, when many baths were abandoned in the West, the East continued to cultivate this practice. It was a way to keep alive a custom that Rome had spread throughout its territories. Centuries later, with the advent of modernity, spas reemerged in Europe as adapted versions of the ancient baths, more discreet, more linked to individual health than to collective coexistence, but still inspired by the same principle: water as a source of renewal. Today, when someone enters a spa, takes a sauna, or a contrast bath, they are reliving, even without realizing it, the wisdom of 2,000 years ago. The alternation of heat and cold, the aromatic oils, the environment designed for relaxation, all of this was already present in Roman baths. The difference lies in the cultural context, but the essence remains the same. The body needs rituals that bring balance. It's fascinating to see how such an ancient practice remains relevant today. Just look at the popularity of immersion baths, spa therapies, and even clubs that combine sports, leisure, and wellness. Rome, with its thermal baths, laid the foundations for a model that has never ceased to inspire. Water, tamed and transformed into a collective experience, has crossed borders and centuries. Furthermore, the legacy is not only practical, but also symbolic. Modern baths still carry the idea of status, of relaxation as a privilege, and at the same time, of a space for gathering. In a sense, when a person sits in a sauna today, they participate in an ancient tradition that began in Rome. The experience has changed in form, but not in essence. And this is perhaps its greatest legacy, to show that even when empires fall and cultures transform, certain habits remain with us. Bathing, whether in Rome, a Turkish hammam, or a contemporary spa, remains more than hygiene. It is ritual, coexistence, memory, and the continuity of something that spans the very history of humanity. And after this journey through the Roman baths, the question remains, what will you do with this knowledge? Because understanding that even a simple bath can carry so much meaning shows how much our habits shape who we are. If the Romans transformed water into an instrument of health, status, and coexistence, what are we doing today with our daily ritual? Think about it. Are you missing out on small moments that could become transformative experiences? How many times do you jump into the shower on autopilot without realizing that that moment could be used to reflect, give thanks, or even find new ideas? History shows us that even the most ordinary details can change the way we live. And if the baths helped Rome create a sense of collective belonging, what could you adopt in your daily life to foster greater connection with those around you? A shared coffee, a quick conversation, a family habit. Perhaps it's in these simple spaces that the greatest opportunities for bonding lie hidden. Now I want to hear from you. What part of this story surprised you most? Was it the luxury of the hot springs, the political discussions in the steam room, or the idea that baths could even prevent disease? Write in the comments, because your insight might inspire others too. And of course, if you want to continue learning about stories that seem small but hold big lessons, subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell. That way, you won't miss any future dives into the past, and join me on this journey of discovery.